But when you have stars performing as they have in this tournament, from Messi to Erling Haaland of Norway to Kylian Mbappe, there are just so many more reasons, I think, much more excitement around these games than there even would be.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vestughian. Today on the show, Argentinian star Lionel Messi beat the record for the most career World Cup goals, but he has got younger competition hot on his heels. We're going to talk about how the stars are helping the World Cup shine. Plus, America's in the middle of a housing crisis, what Congress is doing to help. Up first, though, we've got just a few more primary days left in this midterm season. But today is a really big one. We got Utah, we got Maryland, South Carolina, and New York. And what we're seeing is a tale of two endorsers. On the right, we have President Trump, of course. And then on the left, we have New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani. Now, several races in New York are pitting progressive candidates endorsed by Mamdani against establishment candidates backed by the Democratic Party. So this could be the biggest test of the mayor's power to date. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, President Trump is guaranteeing that he's backing a winner. He's endorsing both candidates in the Republican primary runoff election for governor. So how much influence do President Trump and Mayor Mamdani have over their parties? And what could that mean for more middle-of-the-road voters in the general? For this, I want to bring in NBC News chief data analyst Steve Kornacki. Hi, Steve.
How you doing, Yes?
Good. I want to start in New York City. It's where we are. Mayor Mamdani has endorsed candidates in 3 congressional primaries. In 2 of them, he is backing progressive candidates who are trying to oust more moderate incumbents. How vulnerable are the incumbents in those races?
Yeah, I mean, so take them one at a time. The first one is Dan Goldman is the incumbent.
Yeah.
Brad Lander is who Mamdani is backing there. And I would say of all the incumbents in the country running, this year, or who have run this year, Goldman is and was probably the most vulnerable.
Huh.
There was a poll in this race about a month ago that had Lander ahead by about 34 points. There's not been much other polling, but Lander is a well-known figure. He was previously elected citywide in New York City as the comptroller.
Yeah.
He ran for mayor last year, finished 3rd in that preliminary, forged this alliance with Mamdani. And Lander has really leaned into, I think, sort of the left-wing energy that's there. I think it's very strong in New York City in particular, around the question of Israel.
What about Adriano Espaillat? Because Mamdani's really been out there something against Espaillat. I mean, how much sway does the mayor's endorsement have in these particular districts?
This is much more of an interesting question to me than the Goldman race, is this Adriano Espaillat race. This is a very different district. This is in northern Manhattan. It's based in Harlem, in East Harlem. It extends a little bit into the Bronx. Still overwhelmingly Democratic, but unlike that Lander-Goldman district we were just describing, here it's much more of a sort of a blue-collar, much lower sort of median income district. Yeah. It is about 50% Hispanic. It's about 30% African-American. And Espaillat is the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. His rise to becoming a member of Congress here about a decade ago kind of tracked with the rise of the Hispanic population in this district. It's really grown over the years. So he's relying on, I think, sort of the traditional Democratic political infrastructure in that district. His opponent, Daria Eliza Chevalier, endorsed by Mamdani, is relying on the same kind of energy I was just describing in that Lander-Goldman race. But how pronounced it is in this district, this 13th district of New York, is much more of an open question.
So you compare that to New York's 12th congressional district, which is where Jack Schlossberg, grandson of JFK, who I interviewed just a couple of weeks ago, he's running for in the Democratic primary. Schlossberg has used his endorsement of Mamdani as proof that he is, in fact, more progressive than the other folks that he's running against. How much does a Mamdani endorsement, how much does it affect support in New York's 12th district? And by the way, Mamdani didn't endorse anybody in this district.
That's right. And I'm not sure how much they'd want his support here, to be honest. But I think the sense here is that this is sort of a West Side, East Side, Sharks versus Jets kind of where you got 2 candidates. There's 4 big name candidates in this race. Schlossberg is one of them. George Conway, who sort of built his name through MSNBC appearances, is another. But I think the two who maybe there's some indications have separated themselves are Alex Boris. He's from the East Side, state legislator from there, and then Michael Asher, state legislator from the West Side. And each one of those, the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side, both very democratic, both very wealthy areas.
They would have a different perspective on Israel, for instance, versus the districts that you were talking about earlier that were actually getting the Mamdani endorsements.
Yeah, this is especially true in the Upper East Side, saying where Alex Boris is from. There, like in that Democratic primary last year, Andrew Cuomo lost citywide to Mamdani, but he won, and he won by double digits on the Upper East Side. So it's different. Again, overwhelmingly Democratic, but a different flavor of Democratic.
Okay, I want to talk about South Carolina because I, pose this as Mamdani endorsements versus Trump endorsements. And that's where South Carolina comes into the picture here. So President Trump initially endorsed Lieutenant Governor Pam Evett, but ahead of the runoff last week, he said on Truth Social that he is also endorsing her opponent, Attorney General Alan Wilson. How much is this about what happened in Georgia? Because he kind of endorsed the wrong candidate for governor in Georgia and ended up looking like a loser in that race.
Yeah, I continue to think that the lesson of this primary season with the Trump endorsement is that it's powerful. It's most powerful when it is directed against particular candidates,
not for.
Right. Because the dynamic you keep seeing in a lot of these primaries where his candidate loses.
Yeah.
They're both extremely pro-Trump. Trump happens to have endorsed one of them, but the other isn't saying like, well, I got differences with Trump. The other's saying, hey, I'm even more pro-Trump. And so when those two candidates face off and the non-Trump candidate wins, okay, Trump lost, but the other candidate won by making clear he had no differences or she had no differences with Trump. Where the candidates get into trouble, it'd be like Senator Bill Cassidy down in Louisiana who had voted, to convict Trump in his impeachment trial in 2021. Trump came in there and said, Republicans, I want this guy out.
Right.
And this is an incumbent senator, and he got absolutely clobbered. Tom Massey in Kentucky, Trump came in and said, I want this guy out. This guy, and Massey is publicly at war with Trump. When that becomes the dynamic, those candidates lose, and they lose big. But, the Trump endorsement, when it's one candidate who's avowedly pro-Trump against another candidate who's avowedly pro-Trump, I don't think it carries as much weight because he's got them both on his side to start with.
Thank you, Steve.
You got it, yes.
So a major theme of this primary season is affordability. Voters are feeling the squeeze at the grocery store, at the gas pump, and the very big one is housing. Home prices are up 50% since the start of the pandemic, and with inflation rising, mortgage rates up, buying a home has become out of reach for a lot of folks. Now, Congress is trying to tackle the housing issue. And it's one of the few issues that lawmakers on both sides of the aisle seem to agree on. So for this, I want to bring in NBC News senior politics reporter Sahil Kapur. Hey, Sahil.
Hey, Yasmin. How you doing?
Good. So I want to talk about this sweeping bill that the Senate passed this week to lower housing costs. What is in it?
So it's called the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. Essentially, what it does, it's a sweeping housing affordability bill that tries to tackle the cost of housing from a bunch of different angles. First off, it includes a series of grant and pilot funding programs. So there's money put toward constructing new housing. It removes red tape and mandatory federal regulations. It empowers local governments to kind of slice through them to build housing faster. And this is the provision that's gotten the most attention. It slaps limits on Wall Street, institutional investors, private equity from buying up single family homes, which has often increased the cost all over the country. So there's something in this bill for just about everybody to like, which is why it got this massive bipartisan vote in the Senate. It passed on Monday this week, 85-5. And it would have been more if a bunch of senators didn't miss the vote because of a rainstorm in D.C., Yasmin.
So how is it going to bear out for Americans on the ground? Like if I wanted to go out and buy a house, for instance, and I live in Des Moines, Iowa.
So first off, if it gets implemented as the authors hope, it makes it harder for those large investors to outbid families on single family homes. That's a big deal because many investors have seen this as a way to make a quick buck, to buy houses, to raise the cost, and to sell it at a markup. right? Or to rent it at a markup. This makes it harder for them to do that. There's also local governments trying to build, and this has been an issue in blue states especially, but also all over the country, not just blue states. It's very expensive to build housing because you got to go through lots of different review periods, or rather review structures, basically a whole lot of regulation that you have to navigate. So this allows local governments to kind of expedite all of that and makes it easier to build housing. That's a big carrot for Republicans. One of the things that they're interested in, it increases the supply of housing. And as you know, it's basic economics. If there's more supply of that, the cost will come down.
We talked about how this is bipartisan, which is rare right now in this Congress. How did it come together?
Yeah, it's not every day you see a major piece of legislation written by the Republican Tim Scott and the Democrat Elizabeth Warren, but those were the lead authors of it in the Senate. Over on the House side, there's the Republican French Hill and the Democratic progressive Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who co-authored this. And those four came to what's called a four corners deal. They're the committee leaders in both the House and the Senate. They came to a four corners deal just a few days ago and ultimately struck this deal. This bill had stalled for months. It passed the Senate all the way back in March. And then the House had a different version. And then it stalled for months because President Trump was giving kind of mixed signals on which way he wanted to go, endorse the Senate version, endorse the House version. But ultimately, it was the negotiators in Congress who got together and decided, OK, the Senate's going to include some provisions of the House bill that the House wanted. And the Senate's going to drop one particular provision requiring certain investors to sell after 7 years upon constructing a home that the House didn't support, that the Senate dropped at. So it was your classic sort of compromise of the sort that we don't see a lot of these days.
So with that in mind, we're expecting it to pass the House now. Where is the president on this thing getting across the finish line?
Yes, we are expecting the House to pass it as early as Tuesday evening. And it's likely to pass by a big majority because they're bringing it up on so-called suspension of the rules, which means Republican leadership is confident it'll get at least a 2/3 majority, which is necessary under this process. And yes, President Trump has been supportive. He talked in his State of the Union about that institutional investor provision. He put out an executive order on that, which, doesn't do a whole lot, especially when you stack it up to legislation, which has much more powerful force. He asked Congress to enact that provision, and it is doing that. He's been a little bit more agnostic about the rest of the bill, which is why the negotiators on Capitol Hill had to figure it out. But yes, Trump is supportive, and he is expected to sign it.
You can't help but think, Sahil, about the timing of this whole thing because we're staring down the barrel of the midterm elections come November. We're smack dab in the middle of, towards the end of, I should say, the primary season. We know that polling has shown voters, Americans, are not necessarily happy with the way in which this president and this administration has been handling this economy. So I think the big question is, why now? Is it because of the midterm elections? Republicans are seeing this as a potential win for them going into those?
Well, partly, yes. Republicans desperately need and want this legislative victory because you're right. President Trump's poll numbers have declined, and his numbers on the economy in particular and on the cost of living are very low, mostly in the low 30s in recent major polls that I've seen. So Republicans see that. They recognize that it's a huge political liability, and they want to be seen as doing something to tackle the number one issue on the minds of voters, which is the main reason that Trump got elected in 2024. People trusted him over that. They have not, in the minds of voters, done much to do that. The big question becomes, why did Democrats go along? It would be very easy for them to fold their arms and say, we're not going along. We're not going to give Donald Trump a victory. But they didn't do that. They decided that the substance of this bill, the provisions in this bill that will make a meaningful difference in people's lives were worth doing. So this was their kind of push and pull. Elizabeth Warren had been pushing for a number of these provisions for a long time. She is, one of the biggest critics of Wall Street in the Senate. She wanted this provision that cracks down on private equity, buying up homes and raising the cost. And this was just a moment where Democrats said, even if the politics are going to allow Republicans to claim a victory, that the substance of this was worth it for Democrats to move forward and say yes to.
Sahil Kapur, thank you.
Thanks, Yasmin.
And we are back with Here's the Scoop from NBC News. So we are 12 days into the World Cup, and there have already been some huge moments. But one of the biggest this week wasn't a game. It was a goal. Argentinian star Lionel Messi set a record for career goals scored at the World Cup, nailing his 17th and 18th goals in Monday's game against Austria. That puts him 2 goals ahead of the previous record holder, Germany's Miroslav Klose. But we're still in the group rounds, so there's a lot of games to go. And there's another player that is nipping at Messi's heels. So to talk about that, I want to bring in NBC News sports reporter Andrew Greif. Hi, Andrew.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
So after Argentina won the World Cup last time around, I think there was some talk that Messi would not come back. And if in fact he did come back, would he perform at the level that we are used to seeing Messi perform at? And he is, right? He's playing incredibly well, hitting this record now of 18 goals. How big is this?
It's really important because soccer is such a global sport that there's going to be enormous viewership for this tournament regardless, especially because of the expansion from 32 to 48 teams. So many people are going to watch this. But when you have stars performing as they have in this tournament, from Messi to Erling Haaland of Norway to Kylian Mbappe, there are just so many more reasons, I think, much more excitement around these games than there even would be. Harry Kane has already scored twice for England. So it's already a nice thing for FIFA, I think, to know that the stars are really showing up for this tournament so far.
So I said nipping at Messi's heels. Who was that person? And it's the person you just mentioned, which is Mbappe. And he's at 16 at 27 years of age. So what is the likelihood, considering where France is right now? They have already gone into the next round. They've advanced into the next round at this point, that he is going to surpass Messi's record, not just in this possible World Cup, but also considering the fact that he is so young and has such a long runway to go.
Look, this is just my opinion, but I think this is inevitable that he passes Messi's record because this is only Mbappe's third World Cup. This is Messi's sixth, and that's an all-time record for appearances for a World Cup player in the men's side. So Messi is at the very end, the twilight of his career, and he's playing incredibly well. He turns 39 on Wednesday. As someone who is also that same age, I feel like almost in some ways, like I'm not rooting for Messi, but it makes me feel good, right? Like, hey, we're not too old to accomplish great things. But I do feel like with Mbappe, he has so much more of a runway in front of him, not only because of his age, but because of his team. I mean, this is a French team that for generations really has been, since the 1998 World Cup, has been a contender at pretty much every World Cup. So you would have to think that through the entirety of the rest of his career, he will have many, many more matches and many more opportunities to score.
So Argentina and France, they're through to the next round. Portugal's not there yet. Cristiano Ronaldo, right? He's another huge name, huge superstar, but he hasn't been performing as well as folks would like in this World Cup so far. Has he lost his glimmer a bit?
I think that one thing that kind of muddies the waters with how we evaluate Ronaldo is that he really has not played in high-level soccer for several years since he left kind of like the biggest leagues in the world. He's gone and played in Saudi Arabia. And so the level of competition there is not what it's going to be in the world's top domestic leagues. And I think what we're now seeing is that it is a little bit, he does seem diminished in some way. Now, he is still a threat. And look, even Portugal's coach had said when he was selecting the team for Portugal's World Cup team, there was some controversy about Ronaldo. Like, is he too old? He's 41 years old. Why we have to have better options than this. But the coach even said, look, he's an amazing scoring threat for us still. And he forces defense to take account for him. And that can open up lanes for other teammates too.
So we've talked about the household names, Messi, Mbappe, Ronaldo. Are there other rising stars out there that we don't know of yet that we should be watching? And can we talk Team USA if there's anybody coming up on Team USA? Because they have been playing really well. You and I talked last time about this new coach on Team USA who it really feels as if has brought their game to a new level in this World Cup.
The first part of that is the kind of the breakout star of these first two games the U.S. has played that already went so well that they were already in the knockout round, is a guy named Folarin Balogun. He has an amazing backstory where he was only an American by birth because apparently his mother was pregnant, and she was so pregnant that the airline would not let her go back to England because she was past the point where she could really travel. So he was born in New York. And then eventually was raised his entire life in England. Now, he chose to play for the U.S. and represent the U.S. here. And he scored 2 goals in the first game for the U.S. The first time a U.S. player had scored 2 goals, multiple goals, in a game since 1930. And that was a kind of a watershed first game. It was a 4-1 win. It was an enormous margin of victory. And you think, how are they going to follow that up, right? And really, the U.S. did it by having another win, 6 points through 2 games. It's never been done since 1930. So this is an enormous achievement that Mauricio Pochettino has overseen. And really what makes it interesting is that in his 20 months on the job coaching the U.S., there was really no sign this was going to happen. There was a very up and down tenure in the lead up to this World Cup where there were lots of, some breakthrough moments, but also losses. So the level of attacking and the strategy that they've shown has, I think, caught most observers off guard.
Andrew Greif, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugin. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.